The day started like any other for Jacob. When the alarm clock rang at 7 a.m., Jacob opened his eyes and stared blankly at the ceiling. The room was as dark as always, with only a thin beam of light seeping through the window. The same smell, the same atmosphere, the same feelings. Yet Jacob felt that something was wrong. For the past few days, he had been experiencing a constant sense of déjà vu, thinking he was reliving the same events over and over again. With this confusion in his mind, he got out of bed, went to the bathroom, and looked at himself in the mirror. The same face, the same tired eyes. But this morning, the uneasiness inside him was more intense. "What's going on?" he muttered to himself. This question would haunt him all day. Jacob went to the kitchen out of habit and headed to the coffee machine. A few seconds later, the aroma of coffee filled the kitchen. But at that moment, he noticed something. This morning, the coffee beans didn't seem fresh. He knew he brewed fresh coffee every morning, but today, something was not right. He walked over to the window and looked outside. The street was as quiet as always. But there was something odd about this silence, a detail he was missing. His eyes searched for the red car that always passed by at this time each morning. It was there, but with a difference. This time, the car was moving more slowly. "What is going on here?" Jacob said, his anxiety growing. He paused for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. "Maybe I'm just tired," he said to himself, but he knew there was something beyond fatigue. When he realized he was living the same day repeatedly, his heart began to race. A single thought came to his mind: this must be a nightmare. Jacob shook his head, trying to dismiss this thought, and got ready to go to the university. Just then, he received a message on his phone: "Come to the library. The answers are here." The message came from an unknown number, but Jacob wasn't in a position to question its validity. Any clue could shed light on this strange situation, he thought. He grabbed his backpack and rushed out of the house. The street was still silent, but now Jacob could feel the tension hidden within the silence more deeply. As he walked toward the library, his steps quickened, and his heart pounded in his chest. When he arrived at the library, he pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. The usual silence reigned in the library, but this time, this silence heightened Jacob's inner unease. As he wandered among the shelves, he noticed that no one was there. Taking a deep breath, he looked around, hoping to find the clue mentioned in the message. After a while, he stopped by one of the back shelves and saw an old desk. On the desk, covered in dust, were a few old books and a compass. The compass seemed to be pointing to a mystery as it trembled. Jacob carefully picked up the compass, and at that moment, he heard a voice behind him. "Hello, Jacob," said a woman's voice. Jacob turned around, startled with fear. Standing before him was a woman with a wise smile on her face. Her long black hair gracefully fell over her shoulders. Her eyes were deep and meaningful, as if they had witnessed a secret. "I'm Leora," the woman said. "If you want to break free from the time loop, you must come with me." Jacob's mind was in turmoil. He wondered who this woman was and why he had no knowledge of her. But instinctively, he felt he should trust Leora. Jacob took a few steps back. "What's happening? Why am I living the same day over and over again?" he asked with concern. Leora took a deep breath, as if she felt the weight of what she was about to say. "There is a fracture in the flow of time," she said. "This fracture has caused you to get stuck in this loop. You are reliving the same day repeatedly because there are mistakes made in the past, and you won't be able to break out of this loop until those mistakes are corrected." Jacob was trying to make sense of Leora's words, but this situation, which went beyond the bounds of logic, only confused him more. "So what are these mistakes? How can I fix them?" he asked, his voice trembling with helplessness. Leora gently touched Jacob's shoulder. "Time follows its own rules. To correct the mistakes of the past, you must travel to different time periods. With each one you fix, you will take one step closer to breaking out of the loop. But this journey won't be easy. You must be brave," she said. Jacob saw a determination in Leora's eyes. "If I have no other choice, I'll do whatever it takes to get out of this loop," he finally said. Leora gave Jacob a warm smile. "Then let your journey through time begin. But remember, each mistake affects not only you but also the fate of others. Your responsibility is great." Jacob took a deep breath and walked toward the door next to Leora. When he opened the door, a beam of light appeared, shining like the sky. This was the beginning of his journey. The gateway to an epic adventure to correct mistakes and break the loop within time was opening. As Jacob walked beside Leora, he felt time becoming fluid. After opening the door, a shimmering light swallowed them, transporting them to a completely different place in an instant. Jacob now understood that this journey was no ordinary event. Time itself was playing a game with him, and he had to learn the rules of this game. They found themselves in an ancient city square. The air was cold, and the wind was sharp. The surrounding buildings, made of old stone, seemed as if they had been there for centuries. As Jacob tried to determine what time period they were in, he looked at an old clock tower in the square. The clock was approaching midnight, but what really caught Jacob's attention was how slowly the hands were moving. "Where is this place?" Jacob asked, glancing around. "Welcome to the Middle Ages," Leora said, her voice filled with the patience and wisdom of a teacher. "This is the place where the first mistake you need to fix happened." Jacob tried to process Leora's words. "What do I have to do? What mistake?" Leora turned to Jacob. "There is a traitor in this city. In a few hours, this person will betray the king and start a great war. If we can prevent this betrayal, we will have solved the first knot in the time loop." Jacob began to think about how difficult this task might be. He suddenly found himself in the middle of a betrayal in the Middle Ages. "But who is the traitor? How will we find them?" he asked, as the number of questions in his mind grew. Leora pointed to a corner of the square. "This person is one of those closest to the king. But we must be careful. This could be a trap. Many people suspect this betrayal, but no one knows who the traitor is. That's why we must hide in the shadows and find the right person." Jacob felt the tension growing inside him. He was a stranger in this world, but he had to complete his mission. Leora headed towards the corner of a building, and Jacob followed her. "First, we will enter the royal palace. There, we must find clues to identify the traitor," Leora said. The palace was surrounded by high walls, with armored guards stationed at every corner. Leora carefully moved forward, heading toward a side door. The guard standing in front of the door seemed to recognize Leora, nodded slightly, and opened the door. "It's safe for now, but there will be more guards inside. We must move quietly," Leora said, looking at Jacob. Once inside, the large halls of the palace were covered with heavy curtains. Light seeped in from only a few candles, making the atmosphere even more eerie. Leora turned to Jacob. "We will separate now. I'll go to the north wing. I have some contacts there. You go to the west wing and search the rooms there. If you find anything, inform me immediately," she said. Jacob nodded, acknowledging Leora's instructions. This was a great responsibility for him, but he had no other choice. He quietly moved down the corridor towards the west wing. One of the doors was slightly ajar. Jacob hesitated for a moment before entering. The sounds inside indicated that two people were arguing. "It will happen tonight. Our plan has worked perfectly," said a voice. The cold and cunning tone of this voice sent shivers down Jacob's spine. He took a few more steps, peering through the gap. Inside the room, two men were standing. One was an elderly man with a noble appearance. The other was a young knight with a stern gaze. The knight caught Jacob's attention. The insignia on his armor indicated that he was one of the king's most trusted men. Yet, this person was part of the plot. "If the king doesn't die tonight, we have no hope," the old man said, his voice filled with determination and hatred. Jacob's heart raced. These traitors were planning to kill the king, and he had to stop them. But how? Confronting them would be suicidal. Jacob tried to think about what to do for a moment. Then, he heard another sound. One of the shadows behind the door moved, and Leora appeared right in front of Jacob. "I'm here," Leora said, as if she had sensed all the confusion in Jacob's mind. "We need to stop them now." Jacob was unsure of what to do, but Leora's presence gave him courage. They needed to come up with a plan quickly and carefully. "What are we going to do?" Jacob asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We'll capture them," Leora said calmly but firmly. "But first, we need to learn the details of their plan. If one of the traitors escapes, the loop won't break, and time will start over again." Jacob advanced to the spot Leora pointed to. They opened a hidden door in the wall, revealing a secret passage. The passage led to another room adjacent to the one where the traitors were, allowing them to hear their conversation more clearly. Jacob took a deep breath and began to listen to what they were saying. Right after midnight, they will gather in the great hall. At that moment, we will kill the king and blame someone else, the old man said coldly. The knight nodded. The plan is flawless. No one will suspect a thing, he said. Jacob had a hard time believing what he heard. Their plan seemed perfect, but there had to be a way to stop this betrayal. Leora turned to Jacob. It's time to act now, she said, a light shining in her eyes. Jacob quickly moved alongside Leora. Exiting the passage, they moved quietly down the corridor. Their plan was simple: warn the king and work with the guards to trap the traitors. However, they needed to be silent and careful while doing so. When they reached the great hall, everything went according to plan. While the king was escorted to safety, Jacob and Leora waited for the traitors to gather. When the bells struck midnight, the traitors entered the hall to carry out their plan. But this time, they were in for a surprise. Jacob and Leora, along with the guards, moved in and captured the traitors. The knight and the old man were subdued before they could understand what was happening. The traitors realized their plan had failed and turned pale with despair. Jacob took a deep breath. They had succeeded in breaking the first knot in the loop. Jacob looked at Leora and sensed that something had changed. He was now in the midst of an adventure. He would have to delve deep into the fabric of time and reshape destiny. And he knew he wouldn't be alone on this journey. The next morning, Jacob found himself back in the 1980s. This time, he was in a scientist's laboratory. Leora explained to Jacob that this scientist, due to a failed experiment, had caused a great disaster, leading to hundreds of deaths. Jacob's mission was to change the outcome of this experiment. However, this time, things were more complicated because the scientist was obsessively focused on his work and had no intention of listening to anything Jacob had to say. Jacob started working in the laboratory, secretly making small interventions to alter the experiment's results. However, the scientist noticed Jacob and caught him in the act. "What are you trying to do?" he demanded angrily. Jacob tried to explain the future consequences of the experiment, but the scientist did not believe him. Realizing he couldn't waste any more time, Jacob incapacitated the scientist and stopped the experiment. However, this might not have been enough to change the future. Leora gave Jacob one final task: to destroy all of the scientist's research. Jacob blew up the entire laboratory in a massive explosion, finally breaking free from the time loop. But this was only a partial victory, as Jacob had learned the most important lesson: that time has its own rules. He had escaped the loop, but this experience would leave a lasting mark on his life. When Jacob returned to his normal life, he better understood the value of each moment. He knew that every day was not the same as the one before, and that every moment was an opportunity to shape the future. The loop has ended, but the true cycle of life lies in the fact that every day is a new beginning, Jacob said as he bid farewell to Leora. And this time, he truly woke up to a new day. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.